Ambrose was a shepherd from Winterbourne Bassett, and he loved his job. He loved it not so much because of the sheep, but because taking the sheep out allowed him to be in a place he loved, the Downs. The Downs were Ambrose's life. He loved them in every season. The other thing he loved was his fiddle. It made him popular in the inns, and he was often called to weddings and christenings to play a really lively time. But what he loved most was to take the fiddle upon the Downs with his sheep. He would play the song of the lark and the brightness of spring flowers. He played the wild winds that whistled up the valleys. He played sunshine and rain, and the sheep would gather to listen. One night, whilst watching his sheep and playing the clouds, he became so lost in his music he hadn't looked up in a long time. When he did, all his sheep were gone. Jumping to his feet, he wildly searched for them, but his flock had disappeared into thin air. Grabbing his fiddle, he frantically scrambled up and down the hills, calling their names. Could they really have been rustled from under his nose? But then he looked up and caught a glimpse of something white. Not his sheep, but something so bright it glowed like the moon. He squinted at it and sucked in his breath. It was a deer, a white hind, and behind her marched a sheep. Ambrose scrambled up the hill and fell in behind the sheep. Nothing he would say would make them come. Even pulling them didn't work, so Ambrose ran out in front where the deer led the troop. The animal gave off such a bright light he had to shield his eyes, but as he grew closer, she disappeared. For a moment he could not see, but when his eyes adjusted, he stopped dead. In front of him was the familiar shape of a barrow, a burial mound. He was on Hackpen Hill above the village, where a line of foul mounds lay scattered. In the dark, the crumpled entrance had become a yawning maw of damp earth and crumbling stones, and into it filed his sheep like in a trance. Ambrose trembled. He knew what lived inside the barrows. He inched closer, but froze again at the entrance, and the sheep simply brushed past him as if he was not there. He did not know what to do. If he went down to the village tomorrow morning without the sheep and spun some tale about an enchanted barrow, he would never work again. Losing his sheep meant losing his livelihood. But he still had his fiddle, and his sheep loved his music. So surely that would bring them back to him. So he set the fiddle onto his chin, and he began to play. He played lively tunes and mournful ones, but the sheep paid no attention. Soon he watched the last sheep disappear into the darkness. He had to get his sheep back. Setting his fiddle back under his chin, he stepped into the tunnel and played as he walked. At first, the light of the moon outside lit his way and reflected off the tunnel's white chalk. But soon the light faded, and he could hardly see, left with the sound of his own music to guide him. But he didn't feel entirely alone. As he walked, he felt something brush his sleeve, the touch of a lady's soft hand, and he shivered. In the last shreds of the light, he glimpsed a slight form right beside him, just like the line of a nose and lips before it dissolved into darkness. Walking in deeper, ghostly shapes started to solidify in dancers who whirled to his fiddle tunes and laughed as they danced. As the light grew, the tunnel widened out. Ambrose's mouth dropped open, and the fiddle fell silent. The tunnel opened into a huge chamber. It was so large he could barely see across it. Above him hung a million lights like stars in the night sky he'd never seen. All around the edge was forest of buttressed trees. Fireflies and the eyes of strange animals peered at him from the branches. Between the eaves of the forest spread a huge meadow where 1,000 people danced. The music set his feet moving and carried him among the dancers. How long he danced? Did not know. It could have been a moment. It could have been forever. Then the music faltered, and walking through the throng was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Ambrose felt his heart melt. He knew he would do anything for her. The woman beckoned him to follow. But the music stopped, and Ambrose suddenly remembered his sheep. He began to play again. The woman reached the end of the meadow and smiled at him. Ambrose felt his nerve falter. Did he really want to leave? He could stay with her. She smiled like she knew what he was thinking, beckoned him closer. As he approached, he heard a familiar bleat of sheep. As soon as he saw them, he realized he had to go. This wasn't his place, nor his sheep's. Without stopping his tune, he nodded thanks to the Queen and scrambled over the hillside to his sheep. He led them out of the tunnel, playing all the while until he stumbled into the moonlight. After that, Ambrose was never the same. He hardly ate and seemed to waste away before the villagers' eyes. He still cared for his sheep, but he never played the fiddle again, yet he still took it every day with him onto the downs, haunting and hoping to one day return.